There you go, that is the final score, 4-0 to Villa. Me and Mick Green are still in the away end there. Those people have gone off by now. Mick, one of them, mate, by the end of it, I'd gone from anger into just thinking it was quite funny how bad Everton were at times in that game today. One of the worst away performances I think I've seen for many years. I remember us getting beat 4-0 years ago when Per Coldrup had his shocker. Where does that rank for you? Where do you even start about how bad that was today?
Yeah, it's almost like they played an away game in which, this is the epitome of every single other away game for the past 5 years. I mean, it goes hand in hand with the fact that, the first 2 games of the season have just epitomised last season as well. Last week couldn't finish any of our chances, and this week we've just been punished by every single mistake. And yeah, it's a bit, everything went wrong today. And you just sat here kind of thinking, Aston Villa, the club in the Championship 4 years ago, just 2 clubs on completely different trajectories, and just a bit deflating more than anything.
Bit of a mixed reactions. The players come over. Some people cheering, some people telling them where to go. It all started early on, didn't it, with Calvert-Lewin going off injured again, and then Danjuma came on, who I thought actually looked all right at times. And I think the first goal Villa scores, we could do better defensively from our point of view, but 2, 3, 4 are just shambolic, aren't they? The way in which Everton gifted the mistake for the penalty. Michael Keane gives them it for the third. Ashley Young for the fourth. No wonder they love him so much here with mistakes like that. But they just fell apart again, didn't they? And I think at the end of last season, where we actually looked like we had a bit of backbone and steel away from home, at times. And I think a lot of that probably coincided with Mina coming back into the team and helping shows up defensively. But that was like early days last season, wasn't it? Where as soon as one thing went wrong, the house of cards came tumbling down.
Yeah. I think it's one of them. Just never known a side to make so many mistakes, but they get punished for every single one of them at the same time. It's just, it's one of them where you spend the whole of the second half just reflecting on everything and thinking about, you're already 2 games into the season, and it's just, you're already worried about, May next year. It's just, it's such a massive, 11 days until the transfer window finishes. I hope, obviously we're sat here, we don't really know what Calvert-Lewin went off for. Hopefully it's a concussion more than anything else. But they've got to get players in for next Saturday. Hope preferably players that can play as well. It's just so it's horrible being here after 2 games and being so deflated about a season already. The crossover from last year. It's like the summer's never happened.
Well, you were here a year ago on this exact match week. Does it feel because that Villa side, I suppose, was managed by Gerrard and maybe wasn't quite as advanced as this one, but it feels like, and obviously you're going to compare both these teams we played each other, they've gone one direction, and it feels like this team, the team that started today, if you compare the side that started, say, a Brighton away, or in some of those games we had late on at home towards the end of last season, Everton look considerably weaker, without Mina in the team in particular. I think, you saw that today, didn't you, with the way the defence just completely melted down at times.
Yeah, I think we were sat there kind of comparing the substitutions, really.
Yeah.
And just the golfing, I don't want to say the golfing class or quality, but there's definitely a certain gap in individual talent there. The 2 of our subs were Lewis Dobbin and Tyler Onyongo, and obviously it's got nothing to do with them, this result. But it's all about 2 players who not necessarily struggle, but barely made a dent in League One and then League Two last season, and we're asking them to try and salvage something. Whereas the opposition have got international players coming on, whether you think they're good or not. And then their final substitution was someone who was netting goals at England under-21 level and during the summer. And it's one of them, like I said before, as a club that weren't even in the league 4 years ago, and you kind of scoffing at the difference in players that they've got compared to us. It's a very depressing situation already.
Yeah, but just finally, mate, before we hand over to Dave and the rest of them, next week's enormous now, isn't it? With 2 games in, we've got Wolves at home, they've obviously got spanked yesterday, but look quite good against United. And you just feel already, if they don't win next week, Sheffield United away all of a sudden looks like a solid game, early kick-off and all that again. It's it's just not where you want to be 2 weeks. You know, we've stood here in the away end as well, we're sunburnt. It's just not been a good day, has it? Like, you don't want an away end empty with 15-20 minutes to go, and all of a sudden next week becomes not your second home game of the season. Everyone should be feeling quite happy and quite optimistic, but a game Everton almost got a win already.
There's no excuses for next week, really. Yeah. You know, you just came in and not necessarily been battered, but to give up so many goals and be so sloppy, there's got to be a reaction next week. It doesn't matter who's been signed or who hasn't been signed or who starts or who's injured or whatever else. You know, we seen Villa last week. You know, I remember we mentioned it on the pod during the week. We were sat on the pub last week watching the second half, wondering whether this was a good or bad thing. They came in and I don't think they necessarily played well, but they reacted. We've just got to go do the same next week. No excuses.
Oh God, right. We're going to get some shade anyway, get some water. But that has been the first part of your post-match podcast here on the Blue Room from Villa Park. Cheers to Mick Greenall. I'll hand you over to Dave Downey. Oh, disappointing.
Thanks, Matt and Mike. I don't envy your trip home from Aston Villa, but thanks for your few minutes analysis there after what was a dreadful day in our first away game of the season. I've got Pete McFarlane with me right now, and we're going to go over it in a little bit more detail. Pete, simply put, like the lads did then, a dreadful afternoon for Everton. You know, our first away of the season. I think you can put a lot of different things down to, which a lot of people did after that 1-0 defeat against Fulham. Oh, you know, we need to be more clinical in front of goal. We need to, you know, but it's great that we're creating opportunities and things like that. But in the large part, we look solid. We look great midfield, or really good midfield. Those type of things, I think, that are quite easy to say when you've lost a narrow, you've suffered a narrow 1-0 defeat in your opening day of the season, regardless of who it's against. And that game was close, you know. If it went either way, I don't think people could have many issue with that. Nonetheless, Fulham won it. And then, you know, we're looking ahead to Aston Villa away, who to me, in our prediction podcast that people have listened to would have noticed that I tipped them as an outsider to finish in the top four. I think Aston Villa will have a great season. And lo and behold, he went and got beat 5-1 away at Newcastle. And I'm thinking, I've been made to look a mug already, just one game into the season. But then, leading up to this process, Pete, I was concerned that a side that has that sort of game where they get battered or humiliated at home or away from home, there's always a backlash. There always feels like there's a backlash in a team's season. And I was fearful when we were coming here to Villa Park. I thought, you know what, Villa at home after a quite humiliating start to the season, they're going to be looking to put that right against a side that, let's face it, a vulnerable side like ourselves, and that's putting it politely. That's exactly what happened. They went and beat us 5-0. And to me, it looked, if you didn't know that was the second game of the season, it looked to me like that could be towards the end of a campaign where we're, you know, dare to say it, already down, or, you know, we just about survived. And you're looking at a side that looked already beaten from the pretty much the minute this game started. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just in a to say something slightly more positive. We only lost 4-0, Dave, not 5. But it could have easily been double.
Do you know? I'll tell you why that is. It's because as we speak, we are bottom of the Premier League and we conceded 5 and scored none in that opening 2 games. That's why I'm saying 5-0. Excuse me, Everton. I'm not sure that makes much of a difference to any of us, but we only lost 4-0.
We only 4. Only
go on,
4.
continue.
I think the most concerning thing for me, Dave, is the fact that I don't think Villa got out of second gear either. I genuinely don't. I think we made it far too easy for them. Certainly when you look at the third and fourth goals, it's just calamity at the back. The third one where Michael Keane gets a chance to clear, doesn't clear. He does what he tends to do where, you know, for me, Michael Keane always seems like his feet are 10 seconds behind his brain.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it. He's an accident and a calamity waiting to happen.
I think you're wrong about that though, Peter. I think that you're implying that his brain is actually up there with everybody else as well. Which, you know, how many times have we had this conversation? And look, I forgive our listeners right now instantly, because obviously we will be going back on, or we'll be mentioning things that we'll have spoken of countless amounts of times. But that makes it all the much more frustrating, doesn't it? But you're absolutely right. Michael Keane, a liability.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, the most shocking thing about it as well is that when Sean Dyche first came in, he obviously stuck with Michael Keane for so long, and we were screaming from the rooftops, screaming from the rafters, begging him to take him out of the side, because the Michael Keane that we'd seen since he joined Everton Football Club was not the same one that Sean Dyche had at Burnley, the one that he felt he could trust. I was convinced that would be the end of Michael Keane when he drops him for the four most important games of last season, when it really came to it, and he opted to play Yerry Mina, and then latterly Yerry Mina and Connor Cody ahead of Michael Keane. I thought that was the end of Keane. The fact that we're 2 games into the new season and Keane is now our starting centre half is concerns me massively. And unfortunately, I said on Twitter before, I'm not saying that either Ben Godfrey or Gerard Brantwaite come in and perform like prime Paolo Maldini. What I would say is that anyone is preferable to Michael Keane at the moment, or just in any game. I've had food poisoning for the past 2 days, Dave. I've literally been sick as a dog. What I've what I've gone through the last 2 days is preferable than the thought of having to watch Michael Keane play football from now till the end of the season. I just think the lad's completely gone. He's, as I say, you can normally tell within the first few minutes what type of game he's going to have, and 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a poor one. And I just think the other thing about him as well, I think the players around him know it as well, and I think that he doesn't have the trust of the players around him, and I think that kind of that fragility and that nervousness spreads throughout the side, and you can see it happening. You saw it happen again today, but not to just jump in on Michael Keane. I think that there's a lot of players there who didn't perform today. In fact, that I'm struggling to think of one who did perform. I thought Danjuma did okay when he came on. He looked to try and get things going, but let's be honest, he had no chance with the service or lack of that he had. I thought Dobbin sort of looked lively when he came on, but I'm clutching at straws here, Dave.
You can't do that. The thing that's absolutely right what you've just said, in my opinion. But the thing where that automatically leads to is you then automatically think, oh God, I'm maybe going a little bit too far here, saying that these young lads did really well, because it's shameful from everyone around them there. People who are experienced Premier League players, even Champions League players in that, like Onana there, I thought was absolutely useless today. When you bring in kids on for that, I actually look at them and think this is really unfair, as opposed to other people who think, well, at least they're getting a chance. Well, what sort of, they're feeding on scraps when they're getting on when you're 3 or 4-0 down.
And that's it. And they're coming on because the seasoned professionals, or the ones who are supposed to be ready for the first, these first team players, it's because they're failing. And you're throwing a young kid on. Not the way Aston Villa were able to do it, where they could bring a young kid on when they're 2-0 up or 3-0 up, and they're able to, give them a few minutes. Where we're having to throw people in when things are going against us because of, it's total lack of anything from the players who started the game. Our midfield was non-existent throughout the entire 90 minutes. Obviously, Abdoulaye Doucouré had a bit of a purple patch from January onwards last season, but again, I think that Doucouré has his moments in games where, I think we said before, I always prefer it when Abdoulaye Doucouré doesn't have time to think, because when he doesn't have time to think, that's when you see the best of him. When he's actually in control of a football, it worries me. Alex Iwobi obviously picked up an injury, which looks like he could have pulled his hamstring, which obviously sees him out for a while. So I'm sure we'll miss his energy. But what that does do is it gives us an opportunity to bring someone in who might actually have more of an impact on a game. Obviously, Dominic Calvert-Lewin going off early, that was a huge setback. Especially, it's so frustrating when you look at it as well. It's the type of, he's gone through all these injuries with his hamstrings and with different areas, and then he takes a whack to the face, and it looks like he could have done some serious damage to his cheekbone. The lad doesn't have any luck whatsoever. Obviously, he tried to battle on for as long as he could, but I don't think that with an injury like that you can take any chances. But yeah, it was just so frustrating, Dave, and just one of those days. Everything seemed to. I say everything went against us. I don't think we were we did anything to impact the game ourselves, to actually feel hard done by. I think Villa were just better than us all over the pitch. But as I say, the most concerning thing is that I don't even think they had to try.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent. The bit where I go a step further than what you said is Villa didn't, like you implied it with what you said, Villa didn't have to get out of first or second gear to push us to one side. I think that there's no resistance from us when that happens. And I mentioned at the start of the podcast after we come back in from Matt and Mike there that you could look at that game at any point in the last few years and think, you know what, that's a bog standard Everton away game. You mentioned there about Keane at the start too. When you think this fella's been with us 7 years now. 7 years, 2016 we got him. And yet we're still sat here talking about somebody who's invariably let us down, particularly away from home. And this is a point I want to make because when we've spoken about Michael Keane in the past, when he's had times where he's come back from looking like he'd never play for us again because he'd been so poor. And look, he deserved the plaudits that he got when that happened. And people laugh at that, but it did. It's a fact that it actually happened. And when Michael Keane came from the dead, to want a better term, in terms of thinking that his career at Everton was dead. And then there's been times when he came back in and there were opportunities for him. There were games that he persistently played. And then lo and behold, I thought he was gone before Sean Dyche comes in, and then puts him back. And then now it looks like he can't be faulted for dropping, according to Sean Dyche. And I used to have a lot of sympathy with Michael Keane because people used to go to him almost. He was the go-to person to kick off on if we never won a game or we conceded several goals. And obviously on many of those occasions, he's been the fault of a goal, in first and foremost, right? To me, what a thing that started to rise with him, a thought that come across my mind that used to rise with him, and I go back, I don't know, pick a point, any point in the last 3 years, say. Obviously longer than that, many people will be screaming about, but it only seems to me that these things happen maybe in a mental capacity as well as a physical one, away from home. And then, look, if you're a poor footballer, if you've played poorly and you get selected in the game after, and I'm not making him unfannable, sorry. But when that happens, you're not going to say no as a professional player, are you? Same as if you're Dominic Calvert-Lewin and you get all sorts of criticism from left, right and centre for being injured all the time. It's not his choice or his option, nor does he want any of this to happen to him. But it's very easy for people to say that. In the Keane instance here, I think that when he's going away from home, there's a serious problem. Look, it goes with everybody else as well, but for him in particular, there seem to be serious issues in how he sets up when we play away from home. That then, I think, as much as we've sort of, dug in deeper there, you've got to get to a point where your manager has persisted with keeping him in the side. And Sean Dyche has done that for the most games that he's been in charge since he came in for Frank Lampard. And whilst Sean Dyche is still fancied by most of us, we're still content with him as the Everton manager. He kept us up last season when it didn't look like we were going to. So therefore he gets that extra season. He gets more time, as he should, because he's earned it. When things like this happen, I can't help but look towards those who've made that decision. And I'm not by any means saying, because many people will be listening to this saying, Dave, what are you talking about? It's absolutely Michael Keane's fault. He's Michael Keane. Michael Keane's in that team because of Sean Dyche. Nobody else. Sean Dyche picks that team. Now, when we see persistently that this happens with Keane, the mistakes he makes, and look, yeah, okay, Dyche will be turning to what was successful in inverted commas when he was at Burnley, and the partnership between him and Tarkowski effectively kept them in the Premier League. A manager's going to have his favourites wherever he goes. Get that to a point. But that has to stop. That has to be somewhere where a manager, those around him, Ian Woan and Steve Stone there next to him, come on, Sean, have a look at this, mate. This is eventually going to cost you your job if you keep persisting with this. If you keep putting Michael Keane in there, especially in the background of just bringing back a youngster from the Netherlands who've raved about him being a centre-back. Everything you'd want as a centre-back. Young, up-and-coming, has a lot of experience now, a relative lot of experience is where he's been. Not in the Premier League, but in a top level of football in Europe. And he's sitting there, and we've brought him back from loan. And you start looking at him and thinking, for what reason? He must be sitting there thinking, what am I sitting here doing? I've been told that I'm coming back to Everton, so I get an opportunity. Now, look, we're 2 games in. Maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But when I see performances like that, Pete, I'm thinking, what are we doing here? What are Everton about when it comes to defensive circumstances in games? Because I think many of us, a high percentage of fans, would much rather have Jared Branthwaite next to James Tarkowski in that back four.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well when you consider, I'm holding back a little bit in terms of my overall criticism of Sean Dyche. I've seen a few people have certainly today. I've seen.
Pete, before you continue with that, right? I think I'm you're taking words out of your mouth, but by no means are we saying that man should get sacked.
Oh,
as of right now, we're not talking about Sean Dyche saying he needs to go. No, nobody's talking that way now. Certainly on this podcast, anyway.
Not yet. That's certainly not my view. But I've seen, a few people who seem to have turned a little bit in terms of the performance today, and in terms of the performance, the fact that we're still finding ourselves with these issues. One thing I would say is that, we had Carlo Ancelotti in charge of most of these, with the added bonus of James Rodriguez, and he still only managed to get this group of players up to mid-table. I look at Sean, with Sean Dyche, and I think the thing which might, if it comes down to it, if Sean Dyche ends up, and if the fans turn on Sean Dyche at any stage, I personally think it will be Michael Keane that will be the cause of it. I think that if he persists with Michael Keane, it will become an issue again. It was becoming an issue last season, and then we thought he turned a corner and seen the light and dropped him. He's brought him back in, and we talk about like managers and certain players suit certain managers, and managers have the favourites and things like that. If Sean Dyche can't get the best out of Michael Keane, then no one can, because Michael Keane played his best football under Sean Dyche at Burnley. Since he's left Burnley and come to Everton, nine games out of 10, and that's being generous, have been awful from Michael Keane. He hasn't had a consistent run of form since he's played in an Everton shirt. Now, Sean Dyche, in theory, should be the manager to get the best out of him. The same way Sean Dyche turned Dwight McNeil's season around when he came in, and we saw the best of Dwight McNeil in the second half of last season. I would have expected that we'd see the best out of Michael Keane. If there is a best of Michael Keane, I would have thought that we'd see it with Sean Dyche in charge, because I thought that he might know how to get into his head and how to play him the right way and manage him in a way that would bring out the best in him. I think if Sean Dyche can't get that out of him, then no one can. And it's just, and like you say, when you've got a young centre half there, if we just signed Branthwaite, if we just signed him for 30 million from PSV, he'd be starting. If someone else had just, he'd be starting. I don't get this thing about, if he's not ready. If we just signed a young Dutch player from PSV at centre half, everyone would be clamouring for him to get in that side. And I think everyone, well, not everyone, but I'd say a large majority of Evertonians now are looking at this situation thinking we need to change something. There's too much of a thing about. I think James Tarkowski touched on it in his post-match presser or his interview after the game, and he said something about the mentality and about how heads dropped, and he saw heads drop around him, and it wasn't through lack of effort, but maybe a lack of quality, and he's still not the final third. But in particular, the thing that stood out for me was when he talked about people's heads dropping, because I can guarantee he was talking about the fella stood next to him. He would have seen that, and unfortunately, we've got too many of these players in this side who, when things go against us, they go hiding. They hide. They don't step up to the plate. We don't have people who can take a game by the scruff of the neck and put the bodies on the lines and really get things going. Probably Seamus Coleman is the last one in that entire squad who I could really rely on to put in to try at least keep things going. When we're a couple of goals behind, I just don't think we have that character in the squad. So it's huge. It's massive. What happens in the next couple of weeks? I mean, we're still, the transfer window's still open. There's no excuse for it, though. We've had we've had all summer to get these players in, who are ready to hit the ground running. We've made a couple of signings. Dan Juma's obviously not fully fit. He was, came off the bench today. You've got Chimithy, who was in and around the squad today, but wasn't named on the bench. So he's obviously not ready. We've got Harrison, who we've signed, who isn't going to be ready for a number of weeks. And you look at it and think, well, what type of planning is this?
Common theme, isn't it?
What type of planning is it where we're 2 games into the season, we've basically forfeited 6 points? How long does it last? Are we going to have to wait another 3 or 4 weeks until we start seeing players coming in and seeing a settled side? It's amateurish, but it kind of sums us up.
The other thing with Dyche that I've been thinking about since the horrendous performance against Villa has been, it just seems a common theme. Whichever manager comes to us, they have to sign a contract that makes them the most stubborn human beings in the world, because that's what he's been with that keen side of it. Chimitty as well. I can't remember where I've seen these comments from that. He's not ready and things like that, and he needs to grow and things. Why have you gone and spent a considerable amount of money that we don't really have on a player that is going to be saved for the future? Type of thing. When we had and again, the massive irony that's the elephant in the room for all of us as Evertonians is, where's the striker? Where is the striker? And then today we have literally been slapped in the face there with what happened to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And you've got, what have we got? 11 days, 10 days from tomorrow to sort that out, to try and sort something out. That to me is scary.
Do you know what else, Dave, as well? Do you know what else on that subject? Sorry. The other thing about Chimitty, which really baffles me, is that I'm assuming there was no rush to sign him in terms of, I'm not sure how many people were linked with him. So now we're supposedly going after Che Adams. Now, if we were going to sign both of them, sign Che Adams first, because he's ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, who's the priority? Yeah, that's
so
spot on.
You get him in first, and then if you get Chimitty towards the end of the transfer window and say, tell you what, it's going to take a few weeks to get him up to speed. But that's great, it's fine. Yeah. But prioritize getting someone who can come in and start. It's just obvious, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. And the frustrating thing about that, we've got Doncaster next week, haven't we? A week on Tuesday. I'd probably say, you start him there. They're the type of games you start him. Are we going to be able to prioritise any of the domestic cup competitions this year? No. Not as it stands anyway. I'd love to be able to sit here and say, what would it be great if we had the cup run? The cup run used to be a thing that we were all desperate for in the former years gone by, but in recent years it's not. You think, well, hang on, that's a glorified friendly, certainly in my opinion, when we're still trying to stay in the Premier League, and now we started this season really, really poorly. Not much of a surprise to many people. We hinted at the midfield side of things, and one character that I just can't take to now is Amadou Onana, who we signed for a hell of a lot of money. I think it's I put on Twitter today, might be a little bit harsh, but he's come across to me as a bit of a myth in that he's got all the attributes you want. Absolutely got all the attributes you want, but I've not looked at him in a game where he's probably taking it by the domination. He's not taking it by the scruffs of the neck and put Everton in a positive position. Now, look, I know that the circumstances around him aren't great either. He's not got a great midfield alongside him. He's not going to play in a game where Everton have more possession than the opposition. but I don't know what I see from him. That you want to see from a signing a fella you've gone and paid that much money for. I just can't see it in him, certainly at the moment anyway, Pete.
I think he's the type of player, if you picked him up and threw him, dropped him into Man City's midfield or Man United's midfield even. Yeah, he'd look great because you'd have players around him. He'd probably, play the type of football that he's probably been brought up on. You probably see the best out of him. Unfortunately, we don't have a midfield like that. We need every one of our players to stand up and be counted, and far too often it goes for all three of the midfielders in terms of Onana, Doucouré and Ghana Gay as well. I think far too often they go missing in games, and we just can't afford to have players like that. With Onana, I think we do have to be patient with him in a sense, but at the same time, we need impact now. So so there's two ways of looking at it. Either you think, well, I think I said the other day that his ceiling is very high. He's highly thought of. Like you say, he's got the attributes, he's got the potential to with a massive ceiling in terms of where he can go as a footballer. Obviously, we've got to weigh it up now and think, well, if a bid comes in that's, bear in mind with the 20% selling fee as well, we've got to keep that in mind. It's got to be a sizable bid. But do we look at the short term and think, well, we're desperate here, we need to get players in who are going to make who might not necessarily have as much of a ceiling in terms of where they are going to end up being as a footballer, but someone who can come in and make an immediate impact. So it's weighing it up, isn't it? I think with a little bit of wiggle room, if we get points on the board, or if we had points on the board, I think that the conversation would be different. I think we'd be looking at it thinking long-term project, he's one for the future, he's on a long-term contract, that's kind of a secure player who in theory we could sell if we need to in the future. But we're kind of at the stage now looking at it thinking we need players to make an impact, and we need players to like you say, take the game by the scruff of the neck. So yeah, it's a strange one. It's a tough one.
Like I said, and I'm not putting any drama into the situation, Everton have just over 10 days to sort out some of this mess that we started the season with. All of us are banged on with the same thing. We've got a podcast that we talk about every single day about Everton, and the common theme is always we need to sign a striker, we need to sign other players, we need to get a grip of this season and get a grip quickly. Otherwise, I said it just before we came to here, Pete. Got Wolves at home 3:00 next Friday, and I've always been renowned as somebody who makes everything sound awfully miserable. But to me, I look at that game right now, Pete, just to finish. We've got a minute or so left. That's a 6-pointer for me already.
It seems that way. Certainly seems that way. And like you said about Aston Villa coming off the back of that heavy defeat away at Newcastle. We've obviously just had a heavy defeat ourselves, but so Wolves fans are absolutely livid at the moment. I look at Wolves and I see a lot of similarities with the position that Everton seems to be in terms of a bit of fan unrest, rightly so, in terms of losing players and not replacing them properly. In terms of kind of a lack of direction, it really does feel like a 6-pointer, just because of, I think, ourselves and Wolves will be there or thereabouts by come May. I think it's huge. We desperately need to get points on the board, desperately. We're only a couple of games into the season. Obviously, we need to keep our feet on the ground, but still, we've been in this position the last 2 years, and that Christmas creeps up on you very quickly, as we all know. Yeah. And if you're in that bottom three at Christmas, it's a long way. It's a long second half of the season. So we need to start picking up points, and we need to start doing it now.
Absolutely right. And it started. It feels like the season's already been here. A few more games in than it actually has with the two that's just been and gone. And thanks so much for taking the time to listen to us as always. Don't forget we've got our Patreon as well for a podcast pretty much every single day. And that'll be no exception this week. I've got the Subs Weekly taking place tomorrow. We've also always got the mailbag, which you've been in often, Pete, where I think it soothes everyone's mind away from thinking about Everton's troubles.
Like therapy. I love the mailbag.
Exactly. It's a good laugh. So make sure you join us. Ask any questions you want. And always you can tweet us at the Blue Room EFC on Twitter. Ask any questions, any comments, anything else you've got. And yeah, we'll be back with more podcasts throughout this week.